Yes, sir.
How do you feel about pollen substitute if you're doing it early spring?
His question is, how do I feel about pollen substitute? Well, and honestly, I'm going to say this without trying to sound rude, because your question is good. There is no such thing as pollen substitute. It doesn't exist. There's such a thing as pollen supplement. Okay, so absolutely. In fact, we just put some on. We have some bees down around Danielsville and Carnesville, just kind of over in the Athens direction from where we live. And they're really not rearing hardly any brood right now, so we took some pollen supplement and just gave them small, quarter patties, quarter pound or something like that, just to get them rearing some brood, knowing full well that in 2 or 3 weeks there's going to be natural pollen coming in down there. The reason I say there's no such thing as pollen substitute is because bees will rear brood on this pollen supplement for a while, 2, 3, maybe even 4 rounds. But the pollen supplement doesn't have everything they need in it. What happens is that the bees are honestly just kind of like little food banks. And if they don't have every single thing they need to make brood food, they'll bring it forth from their own systems. Just like a mother would feed a baby, she might be just a little malnourished, but somehow her body's going to produce that food that the baby needs. That's going to deplete the mother eventually, right? Naturally. What happens with the bees too? Well, you can get off 2 or 3 rounds of brood on that pollen supplement, but at some point the bee's health is going to suffer. So we always used pollen supplement knowing that knowing when the next real pollen's going to come in, so they can replenish that food bank, if you will. We do it in summer, in August, when there's no brood, knowing that in September we're going to have goldenrod, and we're doing it right now, knowing that in 2 to 3 weeks we're going to have maple pollen. I wouldn't do it in November unless I was desperate, like the colony was crashing and just had to do something in desperation. And it's really interesting. You can tell when the bees are not really nourished properly by looking at the brood. When you look in the cells where there's the white larva, if they're just swimming in brood food, just got that white pearly food in there, they're really well nourished. If they're malnourished, you won't see all that brood food in there. The larva will have just what they need, just what they need to get by. So that's one way of seeing whether you've got enough nourishment in there. And of course, just like us humans, one source of pollen isn't good enough. That's where a lot of the bees in this country are running into trouble. They might have a lot of pollen in them, but it might all be 1 or 2 pollens. Just like food, there's different nutrients in different pollen sources. When these guys take their bees to the almonds in California, they build up pretty good, but they can't live on just almond pollen, so they're going to move on to something else and get another pollen source in order to keep their bees healthy. If they don't, their bees will start to diminish in health and kind of slide backwards.
Do you prefer one supplement over another?
The question is, do I prefer one supplement over another? And right now we're using Man Lake Ultra Bee. It may not be the absolute very best, but it's pretty darn good. Randy Oliver, who writes for American Bee Journal, did a study on all the pollen substitutes a year, 2 or 3 ago, and had a graph of all the brands, and Ultra Bee was right up there. It really works really well. And of course, again, I'm a Man Lake dealer, so I get a good deal on it. It's a good product. The bees will rear brood on it for a while. They really will.
Protein.
Yeah, it's got a lot of protein. It's not all just about protein, though, of course. You got to have the nutrients in there, and they just really haven't figured out yet how to make a really complete pollen substitute. They probably will someday. I'm going to go back to mothers and babies. I'm probably going to insult somebody, but I feel strongly that there's nothing that substitutes mother's milk. There's a lot of formulas on the market, but it's not the same, okay? Well, we're going down all kinds of avenues here, aren't we? Mother's milk. And my wife's, she's probably cringing back there listening to me talk.